Welcome to the Budo Style Leadership podcast, where we take a deeper dive into the leadership concepts presented in the book Path, Polish, Pattern, written by Ed Cunliff and Jeanelle Hebert, who are both here joining me today as we jump into episode 1. So welcome, Ed. Welcome, Jeanelle. Why don't you guys start off by telling our listeners a little bit about yourselves and who you are.
Well, I'm Ed Cunliff. I got interested in martial arts actually when I was doing some stress management workshops years ago. And I'd gone to a workshop, I tell this story in the book, but I'd gone to a workshop in Dallas with Hans Selye, who was considered the guru, if you will, of stress management back in those days. And came across, he brought with him, or had somebody else there, that was an Aikido master. I think it was John Stevens, but I'm not going to swear to that. But I was just enthralled. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. And came back to Oklahoma really anxious to find somebody who could teach Aikido. Couldn't find anyone at that time. There were people there, but I couldn't find them. But that got me started in terms of reading and learning a lot more about martial arts and the philosophy behind them. And then about that same time, I've been doing a lot of leadership development workshops. And those began to merge, although they were still kind of separate, parallel interests. And in some ways, they came together in this book. So that's about me and about the book.
And currently you are a professor.
I'm a professor at the University of Central Oklahoma. I do, amongst other things, teach a little bit about leadership and about the field of talent development.
Excellent.
I'm Jeanelle Hebert. I got into martial arts, and my first introduction to it was through Ed's Aikido class that he offered at UCO when I was an undergrad. Later on, I went on to other career changes where I went through different things throughout law enforcement. Now I'm the Information Services Coordinator at Council on Law Enforcement Education and Training, and had leadership roles throughout my career. But really, my focus for martial arts has never wavered. I've been doing that since Ed gave me my first introduction to Aikido back in 2002.
Seems like a long time ago.
I just kind of wanted to age both of us there.
It's okay. And now you also, as far as leadership, right, you run your own martial arts school. Yeah?
Yes, so I've got a martial arts school called Rebellion Martial Arts, and there's 2 locations. We've got an Ada location and a Duncan location.
Awesome. And for our listeners, that's Ada, Oklahoma, and Duncan, Oklahoma. You'll have to Google those to figure out where those places are at. But so great. So you guys, through the course of your professional careers and personal lives, you came together, right? Obviously, you've got a relationship, and you decided that you were going to write a book called Path, Polish, Pattern, and you were going to delve into some leadership concepts. But this is not a read it from the front page all the way to the last page in one setting kind of book. So in that, why don't you guys tell us, how the book came about and how it's organized and how it's to be used and kind of your thoughts on that.
So the original idea was Ed, so I'll let him go first.
Well, I think for me, and again, I've been teaching leadership classes on and off, and back in the days when there was one leadership model, more or less, now there's, of course, 155,000. So it wasn't so much a sense that there needed to be another book on leadership as there was a sense for me that I'd learned so much through the martial arts in terms of guidance, moral guidance, if you will. And I remember there were a couple of years when I was reading more and more about the principles of behind Budo and behind Aikido in particular. And everybody I'd read had their own 10 principles or 20 or 3, and it was just kind of crazy. But over the time, I've kind of gotten more and more to where I thought I knew what were the most important ones for me, and perhaps not trusting myself entirely, but also feeling that I could learn more from working with somebody else. That I connected with Jeanelle again, and that we challenged each other in terms of thinking about what really is important, what matters to us on a day-to-day basis that's come out of our experience with martial arts.
Yeah, so I think I was over for Sunday lunch, and you approached me with the idea of helping you with this book. And prior to that, writing a book was never really on my radar. But I thought it was going to be an interesting path to go down, and just really kind of delve into all of the principles that, martial arts has given me over the years, and how I actually use those in leadership. Because prior to you asking me to come onto the project, I really hadn't put the two together. But the further we got into it, the more I was like, oh yeah, okay, I've been doing this. I've been practicing this. I just never put the two ideas together. So getting to come on board and work through this writing process really helped me with that.
It's interesting to me that you say that, and yet one of the things that impresses me with your dojo is that it's very principle and value oriented.
Yeah.
Much more than any other place that I think I've ever seen. So you certainly weld them together.
Yeah. I guess I just never really thought of them together. They always felt separate. But then the more I did this, I was like, oh, well, that's definitely not separate. That's the same thing. So, yeah.
So what I think is really unique about your book, Path, Polished Pattern, is that it's not Ed touched on this a minute ago and said there were 155,000 different leadership styles or, leadership models now, and he's absolutely correct. And but a lot of the literature you can find out there is very dictatorial on you must do leadership this way or this way or this way. And it tells the reader or the listener to do it that way. You took a different approach with this book. It's not that directed as so much it is thought-provoking, right? Which I think is very unique in that instead of telling people how to be a leader, you're guiding them through that process. So for those of our listeners who are not necessarily, maybe they aren't martial artists, right? What are some of the concepts in martial arts that you drew on to build this book and the things that were important to you in the leadership style that kind of this emanates?
I think there are a lot of things, and we narrowed them down, if you will, to 12 segments, chapters. There could be 45, there could be 3, but we came up with these that I think were important to both of us. Yeah. That was one of the growth processes for, I think, both of us. I don't want to speak for you.
Definitely.
Just going back and forth and trying to figure out, is this the right term? What is the right term? Is there a term for it? And I think we ended up using 1 or 2 Japanese terms because we couldn't really find a good way to say that in English.
Right. It felt clunky in English, and we didn't really know how to describe it besides with the Japanese name. But we did settle on 12 because otherwise we probably would have kept going and never finished the book. And then I think it was your idea. It was a fantastic idea of going, okay, well, we're going to do 12, and then in each chapter, each 12 will settle on A through F. And we were able to really kind of get some structure going to the book after we came up with those 12 and then decided, okay, this is how we're going to structure it. Each chapter is going to be broken down into 6 different thoughts.
And I think to some extent I've been thinking of it in terms of a storybook. If you look at some Eastern philosophy and the writings, you'll find that there's usually a story or an anecdote. And one of the interesting things, and if I compare that to some of the early stories that I'm familiar with that come out of Europe and European literature, they always have a clear moral.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times in Eastern literature, it's kind of like you have to make meaning out of it. So that's unintentionally really kind of what we've done. Is we've got short stories, little anecdotes, if you will, with some questions. And the questions are pointed, but it's also, you've got to figure out, does this matter to you? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
And how are you going to approach that versus us going, this is how you should approach it. We're saying, here's the anecdote. Now, here's the thought-provoking question. And there's not an answer given to you. You have to come up with your own answer. And your answer is right. And the next person's answer could be right. And then the next person's answer could be right. And those answers could all be completely different. So I think it definitely gives the reader the ability to think deeper into how they lead and what they do in their lives.
Which is excellent. And in a world of a lot of things are spoon-fed, right? I think this is a very unique approach to leadership, and I love the concepts behind the book. So your chapter 1 begins with a title of The Beginner's Mind. And in every chapter, right, you've got, an intro into the chapter that kind of explains about it, and then it works into the anecdotes and the questions. So for the sake of our listeners, I'm going to read the intro here so everybody has an idea of what we're looking at with this beginner's mind concept. So in your book it says, the idea of a beginner's mind is attributed to several ancient sources, perhaps most frequently with Zen Buddhism and the word Shoshin. The concept is simple, yet profound. We present it as a twofold perspective. First, we never stop learning, and second, we never know everything about anything. In education, the graduation of students is referred to as a commencement. You graduate, and then you begin. A beginner's mind says, I am open to seeing the world with new vision and understanding. I keep an open mind and keep learning, understanding that learning is a lifelong process. Wow, that will certainly set somebody up, right, mentally, to be prepared for what's in this first chapter. Yeah, it's fantastic.
There are so many things inherent just in that. I think in some ways, the beginner's mind is maybe my favorite of all the concepts, although I'll probably say that next time we talk about the next one. But for me, just the idea of being open to new learnings is so critical. And again, I do teach at a university, and there are times when I find undergraduates or graduates, and it's kind of like, oh, their minds are closed. And opening up to new things or to seeing things differently is threatening. And I understand it's challenging, but it's not threatening. They're not gonna collapse on the mat, so to speak, if they expose themselves to something new.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's, in each chapter, right, and you guys have alluded to this, you have a series of questions that make the reader pause and think, right, which is the goal of these. So let's take a look at that first question listed in chapter 1. And it reads, what is it that you will work on throughout your life? And what is it that you will work on throughout your life? So obviously you guys give some anecdotal assistance to that question in the book, but let's take a moment to dive a little deeper on that question.
I think for me, if we're looking at it from my perspective, what I want to see myself doing and working on is, just this very concept of not being closed-minded, of being able to learn from every person that I come across, whether it's good or bad, taking something away from those experiences. And then obviously, I'm constantly working on myself as far as physically and mentally, never being settled in the idea of I can't learn anymore or I can't make myself better or stronger. there are days where I want to, where I'm like, oh, I'm just going to be lazy today and I'm not going to learn anything. But I think that I definitely try my best every single day to come away with something that I didn't know before, and a little healthier, a little stronger than what I was the day before. So.
I'm, in addition to being a martial artist, I'm a really mediocre tennis player. But it's fun if anyone watches tennis, listens to the announcers, they'll talk about how, Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic or whoever it might be, constantly working on their game, so they never get to the point where they stop learning. And I think there are stories about that in the martial arts, and ones in the book. And I think it's such an important thing to remember. You never have it all. And so much like Jeanelle, it keeps me going. So I can always do something better.
Well, I think that there's a lot of power in that. And certainly, there's kind of an old adage that I'll butcher to some degree, is that, when the moment you think you've learned it all is the moment you should stop, because you don't know anything, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly, what you're hitting on here. Keeping that in your mind, in the forefront of your mind, and understanding that you'll never have it mastered has got to be a beneficial thought. Any other deeper thoughts on those?
I think, and I'm going to kind of shift into the next chunk, if I might,
Sure.
in the book. The question there is, how do you bend or flex when your practice or theory doesn't fit your reality? I was real lucky, I think, as a student in martial arts, to come across a couple of teachers, and one was extremely rigid. I absolutely hated working with that individual, and did not for a period after a few experiences. But the other was not at all afraid to question something that he just taught. You'd raise a question, he'd say, well, let's play with it. And then he'd get into it and, maybe change his mind, or maybe find another way to do something. But that we reference a malleable mind, that ability to flex and to see things differently is very important to me. And I think I know a lot about, about education, but I certainly don't know all, and I'm ready to change and flex in order to match and work well with students.
I think in that same thing, just over the time that I've been teaching in general, but specifically at Rebellion, the kiddos are, I use them as the example for this, in the fact that I have had, numerous years of training, but sometimes I'll have a little kid come in and, 5 or 6 years old, and they'll ask me a question, and I'm like, oh, I didn't really think about it that way. Or they'll do the technique slightly different than what I showed it, and it really works for them. Or they'll do something that's just completely off the wall, and I'm looking at their technique, I'm like, that still works. That was actually pretty cool. And so being able to learn from everybody that you're around, and not being like, oh, you know what, I've been doing this for years, you're only 6, I can't learn anything from you, you're here to learn from me. I think that gets you into a rut and is a big problem. So being able to flex with your practice and with your leadership styles, being able to go, okay, this new employee that's underneath me has a completely different way of thinking of how to do this task. And we've been doing this task the same way for this long, but this one makes more sense. So being open and flexible to changing how you do things based off of new people coming in and showing you, hey, you've been doing it this long, this way. Did you ever think to do it a different way? And being able to go, oh, wow, yeah, that's actually kind of a good idea.
And I think with your professional world of, you've got both professional worlds. We got Budo as well, at technology. But I think in the area of technology, that's another great way to interpret this. Is I can't imagine if I were still doing, I don't even, DOS. Probably most people don't even know what DOS is anymore. But early technology, you've got to change. You've got to continue to change. Be flexible.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of antiquated practices in professional worlds that, when asked, why do you do it this way? And the answer sometimes you get is, well, it's because it's always been done that way. That's never the right answer, right? So the next question that you ask your readers in the book is, how do you allow yourself to see each day as an opportunity to do better, to see something or someone differently today than yesterday?
In the book, we reference Jim Collins' book on Good to Great. And I frequently use that reference. And he's got another book out, and I can't remember the name of that, but it's what he found is that these companies that did really well did not necessarily continue to do well, that in fact they suffered from hubris. I love that word, hubris. Say it again. But they got so proud of themselves that they stopped practicing. And I think for us in martial arts as well as in leadership, that it's always a practice. It's never a perfection. It's never a dead end. And I think for me, that's kind of where it is I always looking for what it is that I can do better and not settling for what I've done in the past.
Yeah, I think, so one of the things that I keep in my head, and, obviously there are times where I forget this, but then, my husband reminds me of it, is that how do you better yourself every single day? Well, the thought process for me is when I wake up in the morning, before I lay my head back on the pillow that night, how did I make my mind better? How did I make my body better? And when I lay my head down, I should be a better person than what I was when I got up that morning. So going throughout my day like that, have I learned something new? Have I tried something new? Did I push myself mentally or physically? In what way did I come out as a better person today? And being able to lay my head down and actually think about that for a little bit before I drift off to sleep. Is what did I learn today that I didn't know yesterday? And if I didn't learn anything today, why didn't I learn anything? What was keeping me from learning that day? Or if I didn't push myself mentally or physically that day, what was keeping me from doing that? And so just kind of a mental task every single night before I go to sleep is just, what did I learn that was different? How did I push myself? Trying to make sure that that's a part of my daily routine of questioning what I did throughout the day to be better.
I like that idea. I go through periods. I don't do that as regularly as it sounds like you do, but I think of journaling. I've found that when I'm going through parts of my life that seem to be awkward, that's the time that I'll really want to sit down and actually write something, and I find it very helpful.
Well, I use it as a way to go to sleep too, because my mind is kind of a boring mind sometimes. So it's like, all right, and I'm asleep. So it's a fun task to fall asleep too.
And just to add in those things that you do every day to make yourself better. It's not drastic, right? It's not these huge, insurmountable things that you must accomplish every day. Right? Sometimes it's tiny, right?
Yes. So, when I'm thinking about stuff that I've learned, sometimes it's as small as, okay, today I learned a more efficient way of doing this task, doing this project. And really all it was I learned where there was a different button that I could click to make things go faster in the process of what I was doing. So it could be something that simple of, I was clicking here, here, and here. And really, I just needed to click this one single button. And I just now figured that out. So it could be something that small where I'm like, oh, I was teaching myself this and I taught myself the long way. And today I learned how to make it easier. So it's just little things, I'm not going to lay my head on the pillow and be like, oh yeah, I lifted 500 more pounds than I did yesterday. But I may put my head on the pillow and be like, okay, that last round I went 10 minutes versus like 3 weeks ago, I could only last about 8 minutes in that sparring round. So just being able to find those small things that I've accomplished.
I think professionally, I'm lucky in the sense of working with students. Everyone's unique, and connecting with each of them forces me almost to, if I'm open to it, it forces me to rethink things, rethink where I am, where they are, what they're doing. What can I learn from them? And I learn so much from my students. It's astounding.
Yeah.
Which leads perfectly into, right, especially when we look at how we used to do things, right? The next question you ask in the book there is, how can you respect the past and build the future?
What comes to mind for me, and it's similar to the story that's in the book, but a good friend was getting a promotion in an organization, and she was telling me about all the plans she had and this vision she had, and how that she'd heard this about the group, and she wanted to do this and that and the other thing. And I thought, they're functioning already, and it's not a brand new group. You're not creating something new. You're going into a group that's got a history, whether they're high functioning, low functioning, middle functioning, they're functioning. And the idea of understanding where they have been, what their past is, before you try and build this future, seems to me to be a much more productive approach. It's kind of like in the concept, particularly of Aikido, is that we take an attack and redirect it or direct it the way that we would like to take it. So if I learn the past of an organization, I can then redirect it a lot better than I just come in and say, wow, this is something brand new. This is the way we're going to do things. And I've got it all going, and you don't. Why don't you? Let me tell you what's right. And I've seen a lot of leaders over the years, and those that are more open to understanding what they're getting into and the people that they're going to be working with seem to do better in the long run than those who come in and have these grandiose visions or missions.
Yeah, I think I've actually seen that professionally in the agency that I work for, because we get new leadership from time to time. And so when the leaders come in, one of the first things that most of us tell them when they ask us, how can I lead you? What can I do? A lot of us will say, look at what we've been doing and then make it better. The idea that you're going to come in and just completely change everything probably isn't going to happen. But if you'll look at our past and move us forward from there, you'll find it a lot easier. And I've found that the administrations and the leaders that do that, they have a tenure that's quite a bit longer. And they have a group of people who really get on board and are okay with the changes that they're making because we were part of that change. And they did respect the fact that, we came from a different administrator, and then some of us have come from 5 different administrators. So being able to respect that and work with us on that, I think that definitely helps them move forward. And if you're just thinking about in the martial arts world, or in anything where there's a history, where there's a legacy, respecting the things that came before, respecting the people that came before. They may not have done it perfectly, but they did set the tone and they did push us forward. If you look at any martial art, there's that one great leader, and then you see it moving forward and you see the lineage of that martial art passed from teacher to teacher. And there are changes that occur throughout that art. And if you go into any gym, a lot of times you'll see that first practitioner of that art, the first person that really put that art on the map. And then you'll see pictures going down the wall of the people that came before. And yeah, things have changed since that first picture, but we still respect the fact that they came first and they helped get us going.
That kind of leads, I think, to the next one, because the question that we ask is in the next segment is, what patterns might you have that are worth unlearning? And I've spent a lot of time in the last few years looking at the neuroscience of learning and, read 100 books, but I'm still totally a novice in that whole area. But the idea of getting into patterns that are well ingrained in our physiology and in our neurology, it's tricky to break those or to alter those. It's not something that necessarily comes easy. And being able to accept that it's not easy and work with it is important. I've been doing a lot of Tai Chi lately, and some Tai Chi masters are really, really prescriptive in terms of, you've got to hold your hand exactly this way or that way, and you're a centimeter off in terms of the way your hip is turned. And then I also came across another Tai Chi master who ironically I'd had contact with probably 40 years ago, which ages me. But he was doing stuff I didn't even recognize, and he was laughing as he did it and just having a heck of a time. And I thought, this is so cool. And it got me out of, and I don't consider myself to be rigid, but it got me out of some of the patterns. And, this is a new way to do it. And not only can I do it that way, but I can really have fun with it. And so I try to convey that when I teach students in Tai Chi or Qigong, that, hey, this may be meditative, it may be very important for your mental health, but it's also just downright fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And so just taking it from the martial arts perspective and teaching people coming up under me, something I have to remember is that when I was coming up, my instructors did things a little differently. Sometimes they were more rigid. We were, training in garages with 100 degrees. I don't have students that want to train in garages when it's 100 degrees. They want to train, but they want to do so in the AC. And, they want to learn, but they don't want it as rigid as what I had it. And so being able to break that pattern, because sometimes I will say that there are days where I'm like, my instructor would never ever do this for me, or let me get away with doing this way, or but then looking at it and going, but what did it hurt? Did it mess up the technique, or did it mess up their learning or their training? And being able to go, okay, you know what, it actually didn't. They learned the same thing that I learned, they just learned it differently. And so myself having to break that pattern of, we have to do it like this, I have to constantly remind myself about that. And sometimes I've got to have people from the outside remind me of that, because there are times where I'm like, why didn't that person do that this way? And somebody be like, well, maybe they couldn't do it that way this time, and just being open to people giving me that feedback of, hey, you're kind of thinking about the past and wanting to do it like we did in the past, but this way is a little better. So I think a way of unlearning some patterns that we should is being able to take critiques from people who are looking at it from a different perspective or from the outside and going, hey, you might be wrong here. And being able to actually take that criticism and use that to make ourselves better. I think that is one way to break that pattern, because there are times where you are in a pattern and you are trying to do it the exact same way that you did, and you're not seeing it. You're not seeing that you're doing that. But having those that can hold you accountable on the outside and being like, look, you're not seeing it, but I am. Here's how you fix that.
And that attitude of openness is so critical. Yeah.
So just making sure you surround yourself with people that want to see you better and hold you accountable for being better. as far as your learning and as far as being able to say, hey, you don't have a beginner's mind right now. Right now, your mind is shut. Because sometimes we don't see that. And just surrounding yourself with the right people that are willing to go, you know what, you're wrong. I think that definitely helps getting those patterns broken.
And I think that's pretty powerful, really. Especially surrounding yourself with people who are willing to call you out,
Yep.
basically, right? And everybody needs that. Everybody needs that. So the final question that you ask in the chapter here, it kind of leads into this by saying, talking about achieving a black belt status in a given martial art, right? And that it really is, as you say in the book, a license to learn, right? Which is, a sentiment that goes back to, you really start learning a martial art once you get to black belt. Everything else is leads up to that, and then you really start learning that, right? So the final question that you ask in the book is, what steps are you taking to be an active learner now that you have your license to learn, which is an interesting concept.
This is another one that I really, really like. And again, working in an institution of higher education, and most of the folks I know have quote unquote terminal degrees. And that phrase drives me absolutely nuts. That suggests that somehow they've learned everything there is to learn about a subject, which we all know is just not the case. So the idea of the black belt or the PhD even being a license to learn is really exciting to me, because it does. It opens up your mind. It opens up the receiver's mind to another world. So I've gotten this far. Now I can really learn. And I've seen people freeze when they're doctoral students. They freeze when they get to that point of writing their dissertation, because they think, oh, this is the ultimate. This is my grand work. It's the be all and the end all. And it's not. It's not going to be 5 years from now. They'll look back on it and think, did I really write that? It's fun to see it as a beginning as opposed to an ending. So it is truly it's the beginner's mind. It kind of loops back to that concept, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So I just think that just the idea of what I talked about earlier, of when you lay your head down on your pillow, what did you do to make yourself better that day? I think for me, as far as professionally, at work, I'm constantly open to the idea of going on YouTube and finding new ways to work through Canvas, right? That's one of my jobs, is to run our LMS. So there are times where I've done the job in Canvas for so long that I do it the same way over and over again. But there are days where I'm like, this can't be the best way. And so going on YouTube and being like, here's a video. Let's see if this makes it better. So not falling into that pattern of not, pushing yourself to learn something new about what you're already doing. You don't necessarily have to change what you're doing, but is there a better way for what you're doing? And so for me, just having that beginner's mind, like Ed said, is absolutely the key to being a better person by the end of the day.
One of the visuals that I always have, and I don't know if you can do this, and you do a lot of jiu-jitsu right now in your studio, and I don't know if you can do, or if this fits at all, but I know I've seen this in judo, where when somebody achieves their black belt, they will then stand at a given point, and everybody else in the crowd, from other black belts down to white belts, will come up and throw them. And it's just that sense of, you ain't got it all. There's more to learn, and you may have a black belt. I've got a white belt, but I can still throw you occasionally. So to me, that's a marvelous visual that kind of gets at this license to learn.
Excellent thoughts, guys. And that wraps up the questions that are in the first chapter, The Beginner's Mind. Is there anything in closing that you guys would like to expound upon this beginner's mind concept that you haven't already done so?
I think one of the things that we wrote it in the preface, but it really kind of resonates in this moment, and because we went through those questions really quickly. But when you're reading this book, slow down. That first chapter is key to the rest of the chapters. That's really why we made it the very first one. But slow down and really ask yourselves these questions, and really think about them. We didn't write it as a book that you read from start to finish in one setting. We did write it in the fact that we want people to read the anecdote and then really think about the question afterwards, whether it is, whatever your learning process is or whatever it is you want to do with that. But, maybe journaling about that specific question, or if you're just wanting to think about it, you're just a thinker, you don't want to write it down. But taking a couple of moments to really think it through, or use it as a discussion topic in your next meeting, or in, your at your next dinner. Use it as a discussion topic at the family dinner table. So it was the book was written to really make you slow down and think about each one of those questions.
All I can say is ditto. I'm glad you went back to that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Jeanelle. And thank you to our listeners for participating in episode 1 of Budo Style Leadership. This was a great talk, and I look forward to covering the other 11 topics in the book with you two. So thank you all so much for your interest in picking up a copy of the book. You can find it on Amazon, Path, Polish, Pattern, Budo Style Leadership. You can also find it at rebellionmartialarts.com. You can order a copy through there as well. So until next time, have a great day.